here today to talk about why early learning matters and to present the IELTS result in Estonia. First, I would like to start talking about why early learning matters. Children's early learning and well-being matter, and actually this is probably like a relatively recent development. In the past, pre-primary education and early childhood education not always paid enough attention to the development of early learning outcomes before starting in primary education. But this has changed, and this is still changing. So there are already like several longitudinal studies that have shown that early learning matters, like what children learn before starting primary education actually have like a predictive power in later life outcomes. So now we know as well that what really matters is really like a basket between cognitive and social and emotional skills. So like a balanced set of skills that can start being developed before starting primary education. And so it is not surprising that countries are now paying more attention to children's early years than ever before. Participation rates in early childhood education have increased over the last years, along with higher levels of expenditure. Greater attention is being given to early years curriculum and pedagogy. For example, as we can see in the slide, between 2005 and 2017, on average across OECD countries, the average enrollment of 3 to 5 years old in education rose from 76% to 86%. Two of the countries in this study, England and Estonia, actually have close to universal participation in early childhood education by the time of age 3. However, in the United States, the other country participating in this study, the proportion of 3 years old who are actually enrolled in ECEC was 42% in 2017. But the benefits of attending early childhood education are not always clear. For example, if we look at PISA 2018 results that were recently published, at the aggregated level, we can see how students who were attending pre-primary education, early ECC settings, compared to students who were attending, who were not attending ECC settings, compared to students who were attending 1 year, 2 years, or more than 2 years, the difference, the benefit is clear. No? Students who were attending pre-primary education obtain better reading scores at the age of 15 in PISA. This is also even accounting after taking into account students' socioeconomic background. But however, once we look at the country level, we observe like there is like a huge differences between the countries. No? Indeed, in Estonia, for example, differences in reading were not statistically significant different between students who were attending ECEC or not attending ECEC when they were 15. In other countries, however, the difference is even higher than the one that we can see in the screen of 10, 20 points PISA scores, no? PISA points. So basically what we know is like attendance of ECEC is not always guaranteed. It actually depends on what is happening in the school, what is happening in the ECE setting, and what is happening before entering into school. No? But at the same time, it's fair to say as well that once we look at PISA 2018 results, concretely at the results of Estonia, we can see how the percentage of students with a growth mindset actually are highly related with reading performance. So basically, PISA 2018 asks students whether they agree or disagree with whether their intelligence is something about that they can change very much. So basically, this is one way of operationalize growth mindset, whether students believe that they can actually change their intelligence and adapt and grow to reach their goals. So basically, the share of students who have like who hold a growth mindset in Estonia is the highest among all participating countries in PISA. At the same time, we also know like Estonia is one of the top performing countries in PISA, not only this cycle, 2018, but in previous cycles. So basically, this kind of raised the question of whether or basically it raised the question of what is happening in the EC centers in Estonia that may not be necessarily related with performance in PISA, but it may be related with other outcomes as it can be growth mindset. No? Well, in 2015, a group of countries came together to map out the study, the International Early Learning and Wellbeing Study. So basically, these countries wanted to connect what was happening in their ECC settings to later life outcomes. All of the decisions were, driven by this group of OECD member countries, participating countries in this study. So a broad but not too broad design was developed, trying to focus on 4 main early learning outcomes. These are emerging literacy, emerging numeracy, self-regulation, and social and emotional skills. The decision was also made based on research evidence. So basically, we looked at different longitudinal studies, and we decided which skills are the ones who are more, and which early learning outcomes are more closely connected with later life outcomes. Among these life outcomes, we have considered general well-being, life satisfaction, physical and mental health, educational attainment, employment, or citizenship. So once we decided about the group of skills, so basically one of the most important decisions that was made in this study was to have a balanced set of domains. So basically, this is the first time that the OECD is directly measuring cognitive and social and emotional skills in the same study. This is also probably the first time internationally that we are actually creating like a direct assessment of 5 years old to measure early learning outcomes. So each of these domains, as I was saying before, have proven to be connected with relevant and important later life outcomes. And that was the decision that was included here, together with the possibility of being measured directly. No? At the same time, also, it is important to have into account that this study not only focused on the direct assessment of children, also include the views of educators, teachers, and parents to also have an understanding about how these early learning outcomes are developed. Another important component of this study was the innovative component. Actually, the measurement, the assessment of these early learning outcomes was based on play-based activities. So basically, the assessment was based on stories and game. So basically, it was like a simple activities that the children enjoy completing. It was like administered in tablet in a one-to-one administration. No reading or writing was needed or experienced using tablets to perform this assessment. The 3 participating countries, as I mentioned before, were Estonia, England, and the United States for this first round of the study. All our members all have similarities and some differences. All 3 are OECD members. At the same time, they all have like a well-developed education systems. As you know, Estonia is one of the top performing countries in PISA, not only in this cycle, but in previous cycles. But there are also a few differences that make interesting comparing the results of these 3 countries. No? Not all the 3 countries, for example, have the same wealth. They don't have either the same size. But not only that, there are also differences in the levels of support for families and children, including ECEC. For example, if we look in this slide at the United States, we see that the children in the United States are less likely to attend ECEC settings, to live in poverty, than children in the other 2 countries. At the same time, children in Estonia are more likely to have a mother with a bachelor's degree than children in England or the United States. But as I was saying before, it is important to have in mind, once we look, before we look at the results, is that all have relatively strong education systems. Probably one of the success of Estonian education system is the high equity among students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. As we can see, the 3 countries are actually like a strong, relatively strong performance, solid education systems, but we need also to have into account, in this case, that we will focus more closely to the results of Estonia, that Estonia has been performing, had like an improvement in their performance in PISA over the last cycles. And also the interest of Estonia participating in this study is an indication of the receptiveness to information, like trying to understand what is happening within the education system to trying to improve the outcomes as much as possible, while keeping education available for all. So now I would like to start talking more, to start introducing some of the results from the IELTS study. So basically the data, we collected data from 7,000 children in total from Estonia, England, and the United States. Those are representative samples of 5 years old attending ECC settings, and the analysis done confirmed that the data is valid, reliable, and comparable. So basically, just to start giving like the overall picture of the result, children in Estonia have shown to have particularly strong self-regulation and social and emotional skills in comparison to England and the United States, but at the same time, to also have like a sound literacy and numeracy skills. It is also true, like we need to have into account that we only have in this first cycle of IELTS, we only have data from 3 countries that, as I was saying, they were relatively strong education systems. So probably, the interest of comparing these countries at the overall level, like in absolute terms, is not as interesting as looking more concretely about the differences of the contextual factors that are related to early learning outcomes. For example, if we look more concretely, socioeconomic background is evident in children's cognitive and socio-emotional development in all 3 countries. So basically, if we look at the differences in the early learning outcomes between top and bottom socioeconomic background, this is using data from the 3 countries together, we can see like there is like a big differences. Like children from a higher socioeconomic background have around 60 or 70 points more in emerging literacy and emerging numeracy than children from the bottom socioeconomic background. At the same time, there are also, even to a lesser extent, there are differences also in the socio-emotional skills, but they're still present, like differences of 20 or 30 score points in the socio-emotional skills, depending on the socioeconomic background that you are coming from. But it is also fair to say that these differences based on socioeconomic background are smaller in Estonia. So, for example, if we look at the gap again between top and bottom socioeconomic backgrounds, we can see that Estonia has actually like a smaller gap than the United States or England, if we look, for example, at emerging literacy or emerging numeracy. In fact, additionally, the association in Estonia was not even significant between top and bottom quartile in some of the self-regulation and socio-emotional skills, which also shows, which also stands as an indication of equity. But not only socioeconomic background is something that matters in early learning that can impede the development of early learning skills, as well as socioeconomic background, as SES, children face other significant challenges. Having a different home language from the ACC center or school the child attends, learning difficulties, as well as social and emotional and behavioral difficulties have shown to impact the development of cognitive and social-emotional skills during the childhood. For example, if we look at how big are these challenges by countries, we can see that, for example, home language, it's probably more prevalent in the United States than in Estonia and England. Still, there is like a relatively percentage, 1 out of 10 students approximately have learning difficulties, social-emotional difficulties of home language, which suppose like an important percentage of the total population of 5 years old. Another important difference that we found across all different countries is gender differences. In general, girls were performing better in emerging literacy and numeracy, as well as socio-emotional skills across the different countries. Probably, as you can see, the differences are here that we can see here are not as big as the ones that we saw when we were looking at different socioeconomic backgrounds, but they are still present and they are still meaningful and significant. As we can see here, like the differences are about 20, 30 points across all different early learning outcomes, which is, like, as I was saying, like relevant. No? This is when we look at all different countries together. When we look concretely at Estonia, we can see that, for example, parents and teachers also reported gender differences. So in this case, we have a relative agreement between what educators and parents think in relation to the direct assessment of early learning outcomes. So basically, parents and teachers both agree that girls have like a better language development. At the same time, here is also like one of the interesting findings, probably pretty unique because of the nature of this study, that we have the direct and the indirect assessment, like, you know, educators and parents view in addition to the direct assessment of children. One of the interesting findings in this study is that actually parents and teachers, despite in general or at the average level, they agree with the direct assessment, for example, in gender differences, they don't always agree at the level of the ratings that they are providing. No? So in general, parents were giving more positive ratings than teachers. This is probably reasonable to some extent, as we need to have into account that teachers in general, or educators in general, have like a reference group. Whenever you ask teachers to rate their students, they actually have like a reference group to make this, to give this rate, while parents, in the best scenario, they have, you know, 1 kid, 2 kids, or 3 kids, which may not be enough to account for the overall picture. No? Still, this kind of draw attention about the importance of having like a better communication, no, between educators and parents, and to have like a better communication between what kids do at home and what kids do at the school. Because it is also true, like the differences between educators and parents can be also driven by a different behavior. No? Children may not do exactly the same, may not behave in the same manner when they are in the school, in the ECC setting, or when they are at home with their families and without their peers, no? Their colleagues and friends. Well, this is probably one of the most interesting results, no, from IELTS. The activities parents undertake with their children are significantly related to their children's early learning. So basically, even children from low socioeconomic background who read to the children every day, who were involved in their ECC settings, who had many children books at home, achieved significantly higher scores in the early learning outcomes of this study than children from the same socioeconomic background, but whose parents were not undertaking these activities with them. This also gives like a very clear message in terms of the importance of these activities to reduce equity gaps, no? And to reduce later performance gaps of these students. If we look more concretely, emerging literacy and emerging numeracy scores by children's number of books, in this case we are looking at the Estonian data, we see like a very clear message, like a very clear relationship. So we see how as more books children have at home, better scores they obtain in literacy and numeracy, as you will expect. But it is, and this happens even after controlling for socioeconomic background. No? So, but this is not the only activity that actually matters. When we look, for example, concretely at the Estonian data, we see that, you know, parents' activities with the children as reading to them every day or almost every day, having back and forth conversations with them, do role-playing games with them, having like a numbers of children books at home, like being involved in their ECC center, like taking the child to do special activities such as a sport of music matter, and they make a difference in their early learning outcomes. Especially, and all of this is also, again, after controlling for socioeconomic background. So even at the same socioeconomic status, at the same socioeconomic level, like parents who perform these activities with higher frequency, their children obtain higher scores than those parents who don't undertake these activities in the same socioeconomic background, no? In the same socioeconomic status level. Most 5 years old use digital devices frequently. This is something that probably it is not surprising for most of parents and educators or anyone who is close to children. But at the same time, we can see like some differences across different countries. We can see how children say, at the overall level, like across the 3 different countries, 42% of children reported, were using digital devices every day, while there are still like a few differences between the countries. In this case, the United States have like a higher percentage of students using digital devices every day, 49%, in comparison compared to England or Estonia. Then when we look at the relationship, because I guess that nowadays many parents and educators are actually raising the question about whether students access to digital devices and use of digital devices have like a positive or negative impact on outcomes. Actually, when we look at the data collected in IELTS, the results are rather inconclusive. So what we actually observe is like in some cases, like everyday use of digital devices actually had like a negative association with some of the socio-emotional learning outcomes. At the same time, we also observe some tendencies, some small effects on moderate use, positive and moderate effects on moderate use of digital devices, and for example, the development of self-regulation skills. But again, the effects are rather small and not consistent across the 3 different countries, and not consistent also across different subgroup of students, again, subgroup of children within the countries, which make us think like the data is rather inconclusive, yet it actually supports and speeds towards moderation rather than encouraging use of digital devices every day, right? Another important message from the study that actually provides new data that probably was not collected in a so comprehensive or exhaustive way before, is that children's early learning relies on the interrelated development of cognitive and socio-emotional skills. Experts in educational psychology and child development always agree that cognitive and socio-emotional development are 2 important aspects of early learning development. But this study actually shows and provides data that even using different methods, as I was saying before, like the direct assessment or the indirect assessment, children's socio-emotional scores through direct and indirect assessment were excellent predictors of scores in other aspects of the assessment, like literacy or numeracy, after accounting for differences in the socioeconomic backgrounds, which actually supports the idea that cognitive and socio-emotional development are interrelated and are crucial and very, very important, especially at this group age. Because we need to have into account as well, like this group age is important, early learning matters also because of the brain plasticity of the children. So we already know, and there is enough evidence, that children's plasticity, children's capacity to adapt to the environment, capacity to learn, is never as high as when they are child, as during the childhood, when they are 5. Already after 7, 8 years old, like this plasticity, this never disappears, but it decreases. You will need, from a policy perspective, you will need actually more time and effort to change, to reduce, for example, equity gaps later on in life than when they are children, when they are 5 years old. And this brings us to some of the final conclusions or implications. Again, this is like the first cycle of IELTS. So we need to take into account, like this is the first time that this kind of data is collected. So we still invite all experts and everybody working in early childhood education, including parents and educators, to work with us interpreting this data and trying to improve the collection of this data in the future. But so far, we can at least see and confirm some of our initial hypotheses. Like differences based on socioeconomic background are significant already at age 5 across all different early learning outcomes that we're measuring and across all different countries that we have in this study. Gender differences are probably not as big as socioeconomic background differences, but they are still present. And girls usually perform, they usually have like a higher early learning outcomes already at the age of 5. Also, attending ECC settings and parents' activities with their children are associated with better development regardless of the socioeconomic background. Again, most 5 years in this study are using digital devices, yet the results are still inconclusive of the benefit or the potential harm that may have in early learning outcomes and development. And children's socio-emotional skills as well as their cognitive development are interrelated. This doesn't mean like there is any cause effect in this relationship. So children with better cognitive skills, they have better socio-emotional skills, and the other way around. Socio-emotional skills, children who have like a better socio-emotional skills have also better cognitive development, which supports the idea that both set of skills are actually interrelated. In terms of policy implications, I think it is important to highlight that support disadvantaged children before they start school through the provision of quality ECEC is crucial. So as children who start behind, they will remain behind. So if we really want to reduce equity gaps, the sooner we do it, the more effective it's going to be. So promote initiatives to provide all children with learning opportunities, such as access to children's books or participation in activities outside of the home, socializing with other kids, as well as provide additional support for disadvantaged children, but not only children who are coming from disadvantaged background are going to have challenge to catch up with the rest of the colleagues. Students with special education needs, with learning difficulties, with learning disabilities, with physical disabilities, with social and emotional disabilities are going also to have challenge to catch up with the rest of their colleagues. So more attention should be paid also to these children if we want to improve the learning outcomes, the learning outcomes in the long term. But also, monitoring regularly what is happening and review the effects of ECC provision. It is going to be also important, and this study supports this very much. Provide information and support parents, as we saw before, like sometimes in general there's like some overall agreement between parents and educators on certain things, but there are also some level of disagreement that probably like a better communication between families and ECC centers will actually improve the learning experience of their children. Well, I would like to finish this presentation. Thank you very much, everyone who made possible this first round of IELTS, starting from all children who participated in this study, as well as all parents and educators who were involved, not only facilitating the administration of this study, but also answering this study, like taking part, participating, echoing their voice in this study, as well as, of course, Estonian authorities, as well as the National Center who help us and support us to implement this study successfully. So thank you very much all, and I hope these results are interesting and will at least raise some discussion about how we can improve the future of our children. Thank you very much.
Suur tänu. Üks minu hirmudest saigi tõeks. Tuleb välja, et lapsevanemana tuleb ise ka lapsega tegeleda ja lasteaed ei teegi kogu tööd ära, tuleb ise lugeda ja lapsega mängida. Mul tekkis kohe tohutu süüm ja piin ja tunne, et tuleb kohe minna koju lugema ja mängima. Aga enne seda veel meil on võimalus Javierile esitada küsimusi. Kui te ei ole veel enda küsimusi esitanud ja tekib tunne, et ei oska päris inglise keeles sõnastada, siis võite ka esitada eesti keeles ja me proovime selle tõlkida. Aga Javier peaks olema meiega. Javier, hola.
Hola.
¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, buenos días.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed that. And even though I tried to concentrate on the content, I couldn't resist enjoying your Spanish accent. It's beautiful.
But, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation and your kind words as well.
Okay, you can hear us properly?
Yeah, everything is working perfectly.
Okay, lovely. We've got some questions for you. And I will read them and you can reply in English preferably, not in Spanish, please. So first one is, what was the biggest surprise for you in the results of this study?
Okay, yeah. In fact, this is like a fascinating question, no? Because as I was mentioning before during the presentation, this is actually the first time that the OECD, and not only the OECD, but probably internationally, we are measuring directly, no, like children's early learning outcomes. So this is actually the first time that we have like first-hand data, no, like not only indirectly reported from educators and parents, but also directly measured. So I would say like probably one of that wasn't completely a surprise, but probably to some extent one of the surprises was the magnitude of the differences that already exist between children coming from different social backgrounds. No? We already know like there are equity gaps in education and that they start as early as 5 years old. But actually the magnitude of these differences was actually one of the surprises, no? Or basically one of the hopes that we had was like these differences were smaller at this age, but they were already present, no? Even as we saw during the presentation, even in a country like Estonia, no, like it's well known for having like very good equity indicators. There is still these socioeconomic background differences are still present, no, in the development of the early learning outcomes.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, in your opinion, what is the greatest learning point from doing this study? What would you do differently in the next one?
Yeah, I think this is always important. No? Because as you know, like this was the first cycle, it was the first time collecting this kind of data. So I think one of the learning points is a proof of concept, is proving that we can actually run this kind of international large-scale assessment with this target population, no? with children. And I think that was already proven during this first cycle. So I would say like this is one of the biggest achievements. And I would like to thank, in this case, the 3 participating countries, no? Estonia, England, and the United States, for supporting the collection of this data in this first cycle. But again, this is just like the first time that this is done. So hopefully we will have more room for improvement, no? To improve things in the next cycles. Hopefully also counting with these 3 countries, but also increasing the number of countries that will participate in the next round. And I would say like probably one of the things that rather than doing differently, and I think one of the next steps will be probably to, strengthen the assessment, the domains that we are measuring. As you know, here we were trying, the project was already like challenging and innovative enough in terms of the assessment. So the domains that were included were all like domains that we know that they are already related with later outcomes. So I would say like probably one of the interesting next steps, things that rather than doing differently, we will try to strengthen is the domains that we are measuring. Not only the domains, but how we are measuring them. No? Like trying to expand our understanding about how literacy and numeracy is developed, but also how socio-emotional skills are developed at this age. No?
Okay, thank you so much. Based on the study, what countries could be the role models for everybody working with children education? I know the answer we want to hear, but what would proper data say?
Yeah, I would say that here, we need to be cautious. No, as I was saying before, like in this first round, we only have 3 countries that they are relatively similar countries. They have also differences, no, in how in their ECC policies, but they are relatively solid countries. No, so I think that definitely, I think we can learn from other countries, and we can learn as well for what is happening inside the country. I would say, like, for example, it is particularly interesting that the focus that, for example, ECC policies have in Estonia in giving a lot of relevance about playing, about socio-emotional development and well-being. I think it's something that it's actually very interesting. Like other countries can also learn from this kind of practices, no? And that may be related to how, Estonia performed relatively better to the other 2 countries in some of the socio-emotional skills included in this study. But at the same time, probably there are also things that Estonia can learn, no, from other countries. Like as we know, like the relationship, for example, between ECC participation in Estonia and later performance in PISA when they are 15 years old, it is not associated, no, as in other countries is happening. So at the same time, like for example, this focus on socio-emotional skills could be one advantage. We should probably look more. We should probably look more to understand why there is this lack of relationship between, for example, ECC attendance and later literacy and numeracy development. Again, as I was saying, I think it is always important to have into account like the multidimensional reality, that children are facing. That not only cognitive development matters, but also socio-emotional development. But again, because both of them are interrelated, I think it will be interesting to strengthen both of them.
Okay, I like the next one. In which country you are planning to do the study next?
Well, actually, this is still like an ongoing conversation. Actually, we are currently in communication with a big range of countries, through our governing boards, and also we are receiving interest from several countries. But as you can imagine, in the current situation with the school closure and ECC settings closure, things are getting slightly more challenging. But based on the latest news about some optimism about how we are getting through this pandemic, will give us probably opportunities to continue developing this work. And we cannot confirm yet like the number of countries that will be participating, but we can tell you like it is almost certain that a second cycle will happen, hopefully with the participation of, as I was saying, of Estonia, but also of England, the United States, and hopefully we'll be able to capture the interest from other countries that can add also information, add value for the policy discussions that we are having about ECC settings and policy-related ECC settings.
Okay, we've got time for two more. How do you think the same tool for assessing a child's level of development is appropriate for all countries? Can its result be influenced by cultural differences?
Yeah, in fact, this is one of our priorities always, Like when we run these kind of studies, not only in IELTS, but also in the rest of large-scale assessment that we run at the OECD, but particularly in IELTS, that aspect was especially strengthened by a new methodology that was implemented, like a relatively new and innovative methodology. So this is why for the first time, or I would say, like most of the research done so far, with 5 years old, we're using indirect assessments. We're using educators and parents' reports that happen to be valid and helpful. But at the same time, as we saw in this study, sometimes they don't always agree. They may agree on the overall terms, for example, differences between girls and boys. They both agree that girls often develop early learning outcomes in a greater degree than boys at the same age. But at the same time, they also disagree, And the way that we know how they disagree is, for example, by implementing the direct assessment. This direct assessment is actually implemented with the objective of having like a response style bias that is response style bias free. So there is the direct assessment is just like games and stories that actually assess what the children can do at that age. While educators and parents, I'm not saying that they have bias, but they have, like a different perception. So saying before, we are also accounting by putting the three sources of information together. We can actually account by the different information that each of one is providing. Like educators, of course, they have a reference group. They usually can compare the development of the children, let's say, in a more accurate way because they have a comparison group. While parents may have a less comparative, they may lack this reference group, but at the same time, children may develop differently. They may behave differently in a school than at home. So parents also provide like a added value. So I would say the way this study, and I would say like this is actually pretty unique, is also costly, no, for the countries, like doing this triangulation, like trying to have not only the direct assessment of children's early learning outcomes, but also integrate what educators and what parents think about their children's development, is the way that actually we are solving, we are improving the comparability of the results across different countries.
Okay, and the last one is also about differences. And this is something I wanted to ask myself as well. This is, what do you think are the reasons for the gender differences?
Yeah, in fact, this is like a fascinating question that actually we were also asking ourselves, no, while we were analyzing the data and drafting the results. There is no, I'm talking also with experts, no, with our expert group. Actually, the problem is that we don't know with certainty what is actually driving these differences at this age already. No? Like we don't know if maybe there is some kind of social expectation sometimes can play a role, no? Like for example, the kind of activities that parents undertake with their children may be differently depending on boys and girls, no? And similarly at the school, although probably less likely at the AC center, although probably less likely, may also react, no? They also interact differently with the kind of activities that they do in a school. So I think this will be definitely one of the questions that we will try to answer in future cycles, not trying to understand why already these differences are already happening at this age, no? And what are actually the moderators? What is actually explaining these differences beyond what you would expect? No?
Okay, thank you so much for your time and for your effort. And stay safe, take care, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a good day.